when it comes to sleep training, all these approaches, of course, it's an option. No one has to do it. It's an option, but it is going to help your child sleep first and foremost. Now, is it going to help you as well? Well, yes, there are actually going to be some benefits for you when your child is sleeping, but that should not come with guilt, because guess what? The parent sleeping well is vital for your child's well-being in many ways. Having a well-rested caregiver actually helps with the bond with your child. Sleep training research shows this. The bond can actually be better after sleep training. We know it's important for safety for your child, right? If you're driving a car, there are studies that show that moms that have infants that are not sleeping well are more likely in a simulator for driving to sway from one side to the other and have higher speeding rates than moms that are well rested that have children. So, a well rested family unit is incredibly vital, and it all comes back to benefit your child. So we got to take some of the guilt out of it.
Sleep is not only for the baby, it also can be obviously hugely beneficial for the family unit, and especially, like you said, mom's maternal health, which I'm very big on. Because if mommy's a zombie and if mommy has zero affect because she's so sleep deprived and leading to depression too, I don't want that. I want to figure out how can we get you to love to connect to your baby now,
I just want to let you know that sleep is hard. Even for the pediatric sleep doc who had all the techniques and all the experience and had written books and done the research, when my first child came out, drop kicked me in the face, like when it comes to sleep. And it just erodes at your soul. I get it. Sleep is hard. I just want you to be confident in the fact that if it's a problem for you, there are things that you can do that can help them sleep better. There are science-based ways to help them sleep better. But just know that sleep is hard, and things usually, even on their own, oftentimes will improve.
Welcome back to the Peds Doc Talk podcast, a top 50 parenting podcast in the United States to guide you on your parenting journey. And I get to chat with the most incredible people in the field of child health, sleep, development, and parenting. And this show is a top podcast because of you. So keep leaving those reviews. And I say it every week, but in the podcasting world, it's all about word of mouth and rating or reviews. So after you listen or even pause right now, make sure to leave those reviews and ratings. Today's guest is a returning guest, Dr. Sujay Kansagra, a pediatric neurologist and sleep medicine physician at Duke, who has dedicated his life to helping kids and their parents sleep. And he was on the show already talking about sleep training, what the evidence does or doesn't say. And he's back today to separate fact from fiction regarding pediatric sleep. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Yes, Dr. Mona, thank you for having me back. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, our last episode was amazing. It was a great conversation, sort of debunking, but adding some nuance into that sleep training conversation. So if sleep training is something you've been considering, you don't have to, definitely take a listen to that episode. And before we get into this topic today, just kind of talking about child sleep science and fact or fiction or terminology that's out there that makes you sometimes go, huh? Or me as well. Tell people more about yourself and why you started that sleep doc on Instagram and TikTok.
Sure. Well, I'm a child neurologist by training. I did a fellowship in sleep medicine. So day in and day out, I'm seeing children with a variety of sleep disorders. It can be insomnia, narcolepsy, sleep apnea, restless leg, parasomnias, etc. Absolutely love what I do. I have been fortunate to be involved with both education for other doctors as well as research when it comes to really kind of nuanced neurologic conditions and the sleep disorders that apply to them. And then I joined social media. I was on X for like a decade, and then recently more on TikTok and Instagram with the goal of just kind of spreading science-based sleep education for families that hopefully is approachable and entertaining at times. I found that I think I can have more impact here in the social media world than sitting in a lab writing research papers. So here I am.
Yes, and I will agree to that. I said that already on the other episode. It is very entertaining. I love following you not only for the education, but the comedy as well. It's very good. So I'm not putting pressure on you to create. Yeah, I'm not putting pressure on you to create more comedic TikToks, but I love it. I literally. It takes a lot for me to actually chuckle at social media posts, but I chuckle. So you're doing good work out there, Dr. Kansagra.
Thank you.
Today's episode was inspired because I had put up a question box on my Instagram, Pete's Doc Talk, asking my followers, hey, I have this sleep doc coming on, and what questions do you have about pediatric, infant, toddler sleep? And so a lot of this is sort of just questions people had for you. And so I was curious your thoughts, if there's any data behind any of this. So the first question that I got was, do genetics play a role in sleep? What do we know about that? And is there such a
Yeah.
thing as being a good or bad sleeper, which we commonly hear?
Yeah, great question. Yes, we know genetics play a huge role when it comes to our sleep, particularly when it comes to our sleep need. In fact, we talk about when you're an adult, you need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep to feel fully refreshed. That incorporates the vast majority of adults, but we know that there are short sleepers and long sleepers that naturally need less or more sleep to feel fully refreshed. And so these short sleepers are like the envy of everybody in medicine that can get by on like 5, 6 hours and feel fully refreshed. It's less than 1% of the population. A lot of people like to believe they're short sleepers, but they are not. And
Mm-hmm.
they have actually found the genetic polymorphism that's associated with short sleep time. We think they just go through sleep cycles more efficiently or effectively or quicker and do fine. And it runs in families and they do really well. So yes, genetics plays a huge role. We also know that sleep, there are so many different factors that weigh into how we sleep, whether it be
Yeah.
our caregiver approach, whether it be our social environment, whether it be the sleep hygiene or approach to sleep hygiene, whether it be caffeine we ingest during the day or substances that we ingest, electronics exposure, etc. And this notion of this child is a bad sleeper or a poor sleeper versus a good sleeper, I like to say that every child has the intrinsic ability to sleep well. Right? Whether no matter
Mm-hmm.
what their temperament is or what their environment is, if we set them up for success, most children have the ability to sleep well or at least do better than what they're currently doing. And so I don't like to
Yeah.
get into the whole narrative of this child is just a bad sleeper, because then that actually perpetuates that, oh, they're just by nature a bad sleeper and we can't change anything. Whereas we know that there are many things that we can modify to help children sleep better. So that's my approach to bad versus good sleepers.
I love it. I agree. I love that you brought up the fact that there are high sleep needs, low sleep needs. I am both me and my husband are higher sleep needs. I am very
Mhm.
high sleep needs, and
Me
my
too.
son
Yeah.
has taken after myself, which
Mhm.
is a blessing. But I'm going to also add that it's kind of a curse, because when he doesn't get that sleep or I get that sleep, for him, tantrums, meltdowns, like he
Yes.
needs that nap still at 4 years old, which people are like, wow, I'm so
Yeah.
jealous that your son takes a nap. I'm like, look, I love it. But also on the flip side, it is hard when we do not get that sleep for him, because he is
Yes.
a wild child. It's tough,
Yes.
because you can't
Yes.
always
No,
get that.
that's actually very funny you mentioned that, because I myself I need 8.5 per night is what I figured out, which is kind of my ideal. Yeah, one of my children is more higher sleep needs than the other. He was napping even until like 6. We could get him down for a nap. But the other child is by nature just has slightly lower sleep needs, and that's the funny thing about children. You can have two children in your same home raised the same
Yeah.
way. They can both be completely different sleepers, and that's certainly what we have.
Yeah. And so I love that you also mentioned that it does matter, that we can teach them some skills, because it's like that self-fulfilling prophecy. I've talked about that on my social, about like, if you label them as bad sleeper or label them as a picky eater or that they're shy, like we don't give them any opportunity to show us the alternative, right? That,
That's
hey,
right.
can you be
Totally.
taught to be comfortable in new situations? Can you be taught to maybe eat new foods? Can you be taught to maybe sleep longer stretches and not need this to fall asleep? So I love that.
Yes.
Labels in some ways can be helpful to get diagnoses for medical conditions, but for things related to temperament and, just who a child is, can be a little tricky.
Yes. Totally agree. Yeah.
And then so I love that. Thank you so much about the genetics conversation. The next one is about wake windows. So I did
Yeah.
not know that there was a thing called wake windows until I joined social media. I take that back, a little before that, when I started really diving into sleep. But social media has made this thing like that this is what we have to look at. What is the evidence behind wake windows? Is it a real thing, or is it something that we've kind of just created over the past few years?
Yeah, in principle, there is science-based rationale for why wake windows are important. I will say the
Mm-hmm.
clinical application, the practical application is probably not as specific as people like to tout on social media to say, oh,
Yeah.
at this age, you need a 2.35 hour wake window. It's just
Yeah.
because it's just so variable. Every child, their sleep need
Yeah.
is so different that your wake windows are going to be all over the place. But the nature of wake windows is such that you are building up a sleep drive, which is true
Mm-hmm.
because there are two main things that modulate how sleepy we feel. One is your circadian rhythm, which we'll put that on the back burner for now. The other is the homeostatic sleep drive, and it's just kind of essentially keeping track of how long we've been awake. And we have various chemicals that are building up in our brains or breakdown products, including adenosine, which says, okay, I've been awake for 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours. And you get sleepier based on how long you've been awake. And so the concept of, yes, you have to build up a certain amount of that sleep drive or that sleep pressure is a good one. We do have to, you can't, wake up an hour before bedtime from a nap and then expect the night to go perfectly because you've
Yeah.
paid off a lot of that sleep drive. So yes, having, a good chunk of time, which will vary from child to child, but having a good chunk of time before the nighttime sleep is usually important.
And you said it perfectly, the 2.35 hours. And I'm laughing at that because when you look at various sleep accounts, they're going to have their own wake windows that are
Yeah.
slightly different. Like some will say 2 hours,
Yeah.
some will say 2.35. And that kind of goes to show you that there's really no like clear like evidence of the actual time. But of course you're looking at the child, and yeah, I agree with you. Like your child's probably going to melt down if they're up for 6 hours and they're 6 months old, from a missed nap in the morning. It's really important to kind of know that, hey, we might need to start winding them down. Kind of
Totally.
on those lines about wake windows, a question that I got was, why is it that when we miss a wake window, or just say a child refuses a nap, why is it that when they're overtired it's harder for them to settle? Is there some sort of chemical reason behind that? Because you would think that if you're tired, you would just fall asleep.
Yeah, yeah. I would tell you that the underlying homeostatic drive continues to increase the longer that we are awake, which is why you don't end up in this snowballing cascade of worsening temperament, and then you end up staying awake for your rest of your life, right? I mean, at some point that reverses itself. The reason that I think people have this notion of being overtired and going in the wrong direction is that yes, sleep is important for our emotion, for regulation, etc. And so you are going to see a child that's having a harder time maintaining that emotional regulation when they're in that sleep deprived state. So that might appear to be a second wind, or that you've missed this magical window and now your child is, having a harder time. And yes, they may have a harder time because that emotional regulation piece is now kind of out of whack. The other
Yeah.
scenario is that if it happens at nighttime, our circadian rhythm is such that it tends to peak for adults right before we go to bed. But for children, it can be peaking at the highest level of activity after they've fallen asleep for the night. And so sometimes if you're awake too long and you're starting to see that peak, that comes along with its own burst of energy. And people might think, well, why can't my child settle now? Well, it's usually because then you have to wait for that peak kind of dies down on the other end of that peak where the circadian rhythm starts making you feel sleepy again. So there can be a variety of reasons. But know that your child's sleep drive is still building while they're awake. So that's okay.
Yeah, going back to my high sleep needs kid, we actually, from the time of this recording yesterday, he took a flight with my husband back from Tampa nearby, and his bedtime is usually 7:30 or 8, but he was up until 11, and he was,
Yes.
it was tough. I mean, he was so excited and happy and ready to party, and I'm like, sweetie, it's not party time. We're gonna wind down. It's bath time. I gave him a bath because it helps prime him for sleep. But
Yeah.
and then my husband's like, he was just talking gibberish, like he was just repeating things over and over, like almost like he was drugged because of how tired he was. But then
That's
it
right.
came, right? Then he was like, okay,
Yes.
mommy, I'm very tired. I'm like, yes, sweetie, you are very tired. Let's
Yeah.
go to bed. You did
Yeah.
great. No, I love this. Now the other question I got was about sleep crutches. I'm putting that in quotes. I know it's a podcast, people can't see what I'm doing. When it comes to things like nursing to sleep, using things like white noise, is there some things that are considered sleep crutches, or how would you define that to a family, and if it's something to be concerned about?
Yeah. So, early in life, it's, at least the, first few months, you do what you need to do to get your child to fall asleep.
Yeah.
There's no necessarily spoiling your child, etc. A sleep crutch I would define as anything that's external that the child then needs every time they wake up in a way that's negative for their sleep. And so let's use the adult as the example. In the last podcast we talked about an adult that needs a TV on to fall asleep, and then when they wake up and the TV's off, they're like, oh well, I got to turn that TV back on to fall asleep, or the radio, or your meditation music, etc., etc. If you're developing a pattern in which your child becomes reliant on something and it's causing a longer nighttime awakening, it's causing them to wake up and cry and not be happy, that's when it can be a problem. And we talk about the whole sleep training. We talked about that in the last podcast. If it's becoming in a problematic pattern in which is causing everybody to wake up multiple times and be miss out on sleep, then you can try to get rid of those sleep crutches. Typically after 4 months of age, and definitely after 6 months of age, you can try to wean them and help them learn to self-soothe. But early on, sleep crutches and feeding to sleep and rocking to sleep and all that, it's pretty much par for the course.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned this also in the other episode, that using the nursing to sleep as an example, although it can be a sleep association that, okay, they felt like they need that, the decision to eliminate that can be a personal choice, like you had mentioned already. Like a family can finally decide, like, I'm done with this, I don't want to do it. That's how I usually end up guiding families in my office. They're like, I'm ready, I don't want this to be the reality anymore. I loved it for a few months or however long, but now I need to eliminate that sort of association. So it is, again, such a nuanced conversation there too.
For sure. And I always say, the nursing one is a big one, and it comes with lots of emotion, lots of opinion. And I'll say there are times where, nursing is for nutritional value, and there are times where nursing ends up being like a quick soothing. The child has become dependent on it for soothing.
Yes.
And we have to kind of distinguish between the two. Nutrition, of course, vital and important. If you're using mom as a pacifier, that can become problematic for everybody. And so we have to make sure we're drawing the distinction.
Yeah. Oh, I talk about that all the time with my mom. So I was like, are you okay being used as a pacifier? Because if you are, we're not going to change anything. And most of my families that come to me are like, no, I don't want that. I want it to be for nutrition only. I love my baby, but I would love to incorporate other things that we can do to help soothe that baby. That's not always me, because then I feel like I can't ever rest. And I think it's an important conversation, because we talked about this in the last episode, that sleep is not only for the baby. It also can be obviously hugely beneficial for the family unit, and especially, like you said, mom's maternal health, which I'm very big on, because if mommy's a zombie and if mommy has zero affect because she's so sleep deprived and leading to depression too, I don't want that. I want to figure out how can we get you to love to connect to your baby now,
I'd love to comment on that, because at the end of the day, I'm a pediatric sleep doc, and so the things that I recommend are, of course, are for the child's sleep. But parents are often this question, this dilemma of like, am I doing this to help myself at the risk of putting my baby through harm, etc. And there are two things there. When it comes to sleep training, all these approaches, of course, it's an option. No one has to do it. It's an option. But, it is going to help your child sleep first and foremost. Now, is it going to help you as well? Well, yes, there are actually going to be some benefits for you when your child is sleeping, but that should not come with guilt, because guess what? The parent sleeping well is vital for your child's well-being in many ways. Having a well-rested caregiver actually helps with a bond with your child. Sleep training research shows this. The bond can actually be better after sleep training. We know it's important for safety for your child, right? If you're driving a car, there are studies that show that moms that have infants that are not sleeping well are more likely in a simulator for driving to sway from one side or the other and have higher speeding rates than moms that are well rested that have children. So, a well rested family unit is incredibly vital, and it all comes back to benefit your child. So we got to take some of the guilt out of it.
Yeah.
Your sleep is actually helping your child.
Yeah.
It's helping you, of course, but it's helping your child too.
Yeah, me and you have both mentioned this, that, we don't carry a lot of that guilt when we make choices regarding our children, only because we know the research, but also know clinical experience and know, okay, I can give an example. I can formula feed my baby. I breastfed one. I'm not worried. They're going to be great. I can sleep train using this method, sleep train doing this one, not sleep train at all. I know they're going to be fine, because it's not like a checkbox of parenting, right? I think a lot of our generation has fallen into that, oh, well, okay, to be a connected mother, and I'm speaking because a lot of mothers listen to the show, I need to breastfeed, I need to co-sleep, I need to baby wear, I need to do this, I can't work, I can't do anything. I'm like, no, it's that's not how parenting is. It's such a multifaceted thing that allows us to bond to our beautiful babies.
The pressure that I feel like parents face right now in the world of social media is immense. Like I really sympathize. I can't empathize, because back when I was raising kids, I was not involved or involved in social media all that much, or taking much from the social media world, and because I had my own kind of medical pediatrician knowledge that I was kind of relying on.
Yeah,
and a great pediatrician. My pediatrician was absolutely amazing for my kids. So it is a tough space to be raising children in, and I 100% agree with your message, which is if you're consuming too much of this, you have to do this and you have to do that. Apart from safety for your child, which in my mind, that's where I kind of cross the line. That's where yes, you have to. If we know something is safe, like, you're going to have car seats for your child. You're going to vaccinate your child. This is safety, basic safety. Apart from that, parenting, it's filled with choices that you can make and feel completely fine with, because your child is still safe and nourished and thriving, when it comes to all different choices, when it comes to how we feed, how we put them to sleep, what clothes we put them in, how we potty train. I mean, the list goes on. And so,
oh my gosh, yes.
Too much pressure. So if you're hearing somebody saying you have to do this, please just go ahead and know that's like already a yellow flag for me to be like, no one should be telling you exactly how when it comes to the parenting choices, especially when there are so many choices in all these categories.
No, very well said. The next thing I wanted to go into was about connecting sleep cycles. So, is there a certain
Yes.
age where a baby or toddler should be able to connect sleep cycles on their own, or use that term sleeping through the night? And I know you mentioned that terminology on the last episode, and I'll briefly say this is a child's ability to wake up, whether they in the middle of the night through their sleep cycles, and not need any assistance to go back down to sleep. Is there a certain age that we'd see that from research, or that we should say, you know what? There's something else that may be going on here. Why is your child not able to do this?
Yeah, and I wish I could give you a set cutoff to be like, at this age, your child should definitely be
Mm-hmm.
connecting sleep cycles and sleep through the night. When we look at the data, like almost every other topic that we look at in sleep, that ends up being a wide range. And so, the
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote sleep through the night, depending on how we define it, there was a great study that looked at three different definitions of sleeping through the night. One was a 6 hour stretch at night, one was an 8 hour stretch at night, one was an 8 hour stretch between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. When you look at those three different criteria, even at 1 month of age, about 10% of infants at some point that first month have hit those three criteria. They can quote unquote sleep through the night. This is, just naturally. This is without any sleep training, etc. By 3 months of age, about 50% of children have met many of those criteria to quote unquote sleep through the night. Again, without this is just natural evolution of sleep without any sort of behavioral interventions or sleep training, etc. And by 1 year of age, about 80 to 90% of children at some point in their lives, they don't have to currently be doing it, but at some point have been able to quote unquote sleep through the night. So it's a wide range. It's a wide range.
Yeah.
So left to their own devices, I would say yes, at least at some point along that first year of life, the vast majority of children will have had likely an 8 hour chunk at night where they can sleep continuously and quote unquote connect the sleep cycles. So
And I imagine it would be really hard to create, maybe not so hard to create a study, but really hard to get good information because there's so many variables to this, right? Like,
yes,
is there parent intervention? What is happening? The age of the child, preterm, term. I
yes,
mean, there's so much,
yes,
again, temperament. Like, it's really hard for us to say that, oh, every kid by 1 year should be, sleeping through. In the studies that you mentioned, using the I think 6 hours, 8 hours, 10, was that including feeds, or it was a variable situation in terms of
that's
that
right. So
research?
they would not have woken up to have a feed because their window for
Perfect. So
wakefulness was
like
such that it
complete
would not have
stretch.
been
Right.
fed. That's right. Complete
Yeah.
stretch. And if they wake or make noises for a short period of time and not needing active intervention from the caregiver. So yes, children can do it very young. Now, I guess the $1 million question for parents is, can they push to make that happen earlier,
Mm-hmm.
or do it in a more robust fashion? And yes, that's where that whole episode regarding sleep training approaches or behavioral approaches to helping children sleep. We do have data that shows in the short and medium term that can help with sleep consolidation at night and help with sleep metrics and parental reported sleep and even objective measures of sleep for children. So, and that's usually around between 4 and 6 months of age in most situations.
Yeah. And you had mentioned that on the last episode too about that 4 to 6 month. Sometimes I hear parents tell me that their pediatrician said that they also have to be a minimum weight. And I
Mm,
don't agree with that. But is there any research about weight limitations or minimums for regarding
yeah.
sleep training?
No, and again, this is something I certainly will defer to you and your pediatrician. I would say that if your child is hitting their milestones and on the right curve when it comes to overall weight, once they're past their newborn kind of weight, because we know it
Yeah.
drops initially. Once you're past your newborn weight and gaining, I feel like you're pretty much you're in a pretty good zone. You're kind of in a safe zone, such
Yes.
that if your child is sleeping beyond those 3 hours, we're like, oh, you got to wake them up. You have a little bit more liberty there. The younger they are, of course, we don't want them going too long of a stretch. But yes, by 4 to 6 months of age, we know that children physiologically should be able to make it without feeding if they're in that situation at nighttime. That's not to say that they can immediately go there if they're used to consuming lots of calories at night. Because if you're used to consuming the calories, your body will naturally feel hungry at that time. And I always say in my caveat is we don't sleep train through hunger. And if your child is hungry, you're going to feed them, and that's an important
Yeah.
part. But yes, at a certain age, your body physiologically should be robust enough that you can sleep through the night without having any issues with blood sugar, etc.
Yeah. Oh, great. I love that. I know I added that question on because I just felt like I get that often. And I agree. I mean, there's no minimum weight, but we want to see that there's good trends, right? Like the only time I'll ever
Yes.
even entertain a conversation about sleep training, like you said, usually it's the 4 month. On the last episode, I did discuss that. I do sometimes talk about it earlier, like slightly around two and a
Mm.
half, 3 months, but there's very, very clear distinctions on when I'm going to talk about it. And one of them is if the child is stretching already, like 8 to 10 hours of sleep, not needing feeds, temperament is there. But it's, yeah, there's no weight minimum, but your child needs to be thriving. And, I
Yes.
wish from a general pediatrician standpoint, because not many of us are well versed in sleep training education and all the different varieties of sleep. I have just self-taught myself a lot of this stuff. But it really would be great to have that sort of holistic approach of, okay, what is going on? How many times are we waking? What is going on with the nighttime feed? Is your child seeming like it's a pacifier feed? Is it sort of a full feed? Like, what is going on, right? These are all the
Yes.
reasons that there's now all these sleep consultants. And
Hmm.
I wish in my dream world, a sleep consultant would have educational background in child development, have educational background in formula and breastfeeding, and educational background and all of that, but they don't. And so I get a little bit sometimes like, remember the nuance there, guys. Remember that it's sleep is not just sleep. Sleep is, how is the baby feeding? What are the feedings like during the day? Are you snacking during the day? Because if we can get the calories in the day, then we may not need to have calories at night. And we see that depending on the baby's age. So such an important conversation. The last one I wanted to talk about was about, there's so much, apps out there, things like Wonder Weeks and Leaps, and also about regressions.
Mm.
Are there really certain ages that regressions happen from science? Using the 4 month as an example, everyone's like, well, yes,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
shift in, how 4 months sleep, architecture is going on. What is the things we know about sleep regressions?
Yeah, so sleep regressions, the whole concept behind there's that there are going to be regressions in sleep at a certain month of, of your life came about from a very small study of about 16 infants. Study was published at the same time the author, wrote a book and had, lots of great information to share with the world. But future studies have not been able to replicate that. Even future studies from
Mm.
this author's own lab with larger sample sizes are not able to replicate that same timing. And in fact, Dr. Jody Mendel, who I consider the guru of infant sleep, did an informal analysis of 3,500 infants, looking at when do parents report that there's a sleep problem. And at roughly every month of life that first year, it comes out to about 30% of parents
Yeah.
reporting a sleep issue. And so at 3 months, I think it was 32%. At 4 months, it was 25%. At 5 months, it was 30%. So it's relatively the same throughout. So should you be fearing a sleep regression? No. Do sleep regressions
Yeah.
happen? All the time? I just experienced like a 502-month sleep regression in my. I mean, it's your
Yeah.
whole life. Sleep is not linear. There's going to be
Yes.
bumps in the road. As long as you're keeping things consistent and being persistent and using what's worked in the past, don't let it knock you off kilter. Child's gonna have he's gonna have teeth coming out. That's gonna cause a sleep. You're gonna go on vacation. Grandparents are gonna come and take care of the kid for a few days. They're gonna,
Yeah.
there's gonna be regressions. That's just par for the course for sleep. But don't fear that they're gonna happen at a certain time. They just happen at all the time. That might not be
Yeah. I
that
mean,
comforting,
again,
but
no,
yeah.
but I love hearing the way you talk about that because I agree with the same thing. And it wasn't, again, until I got on social that I was like, why are we fearing this sort of very, again, common thing? And again, if we didn't have any of this information, our parents, for example, if I told my parent, oh yeah, my daughter's going through a sleep regression, my mom would be like, what are you talking about? Like
Yeah.
it's almost like these terminologies have been created in modern parenting that add more stress
Oh
because
my gosh,
the amount
yes.
of people fearing the 4 month sleep regression. I mean, literally, they're in anxiety mode, thinking when their baby is already sleeping longer stretches and they're like, oh my God, it's coming. And I'm like, okay, even if it does come, what is the purpose of fearing it now? Because then now not only are you losing sleep right now when your child's
You,
sleeping, but now you're going to lose sleep when the child goes through
I
a regression.
we
Like
should,
it's so
yeah.
it's yeah.
You just help. I think let's coin a new term. I love this. This is like social media induced anxiety parental sleep regression. That's what we're actually causing
Yes,
here.
yes. Yeah.
But
No,
no,
it's
I
it's
hear
it's
you. Yeah,
completely real. And
yeah.
also I will say, like, we talked about the different temperaments of a child. My son rarely went through I'm going to use regressions in quotes. Like he did go through them, but teething really didn't affect him as much. My
Hmm.
daughter, my goodness, I mean, she's doing these regressions every 2 weeks. Anytime anything changes, she's starting to crawl, walk, teeth, she looks a certain way. There's some sort of change in her sleep architecture. And so
Yeah.
we've really learned to roll with it. And again, not
Yes.
label it, not worry too much about it. It is beneficial that we've taught both of our children some self-settling skills. So we're able to kind of do a little bit of that. We do check-ins. We use a Ferber technique for sleep regressions. We obviously go in, make sure she's not in pain, make
Mhm.
sure our son was not in pain if he went through it. And we do that, but there's definitely way too much fear. And then you're just losing the joy of parenting. Like you're
This is,
so
yeah,
fixated on
yes.
what's going to happen that you're not even enjoying your baby when they're actually not in a sleep regression. Like enjoy it.
Yes, yes.
Enjoy the sleep. Yeah.
This is a good time to pause for a parent sanity inducing message, which is just because, and we talked about this last time too, just because your sister-in-law's child at 8 weeks of age is sleeping 12 hours, you got to hear this, parents. It's not necessarily because they're doing something amazingly right. And just because you're having sleep challenges, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because all
Yeah.
children are different. They're going to do things at a different pace in a different way. And that's okay. Don't
Yeah.
pathologize your own child in your own parenting experience, because every experience is different. And you'll see that even with two
Yeah.
children in your own home. Like I had two children that were completely different sleepers. And that's just their nature, their temperament, their genetics. It's actually every child is slightly different, right? So we have to keep
Yeah.
that in mind. So stay sane.
Yeah.
Don't pathologize your
Yeah.
parenting experience. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you for a final message, but that was a great one. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up and for all of our listeners today?
I just want to let you know that sleep is hard. Even for the
Mm-hmm.
pediatric sleep doc who had all the techniques and all the experience and had written books and done the research, when my first child came out, dropped kicked me in the face, like when it comes to sleep. And it just erodes at your soul. I get it. Sleep is hard. I just want you to be confident in the fact that if it's a problem for you, there are things that you can do that can help them sleep better. There are science-based ways to help them sleep better. But just know that sleep is hard, and things usually, even on their own, oftentimes will improve. So during the toughest of times, I encourage you to kind of hang in there and reach out to your doctors for help. That's what your pediatrician is there for. Reach out to your doctors, your support system for help. But sleep is hard, and I'm hoping to make it 5% easier with the information that I provide.
Yeah, well, you are. And so I want to thank you again for joining me on this episode, the episode we already recorded. Again, if you have not listened to that, make sure you listen to that. And thank you for joining me. I could have you on again. I know you have a lot of education and resources in older children as well. I know one of the biggest things we talked about is maybe having an episode about melatonin and children,
Would love it.
because we get a lot of that information. So I know
Yes.
you're going to be back on the show many times. So it's such a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you, as always, for having me.
And where can people go to stay connected? And also, I know you have a book that you wrote when you had your first child. So if you can give all that information.
Yeah, sure. So I'm That Sleep Doc is my handle. That Sleep Doc on any social media platform. The book is called My Child Won't Sleep. It's a quick, kind of high yield, step-by-step, science-based guide to helping with all the behavioral techniques to help with sleep, including sleep training, limit setting for infants, or limit setting for toddlers, and delayed sleep phase and insomnia for teenagers. But I talk about all that stuff on my social media platform. So no pressure to get the book. Come follow me on social. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. You must follow him on social for, again, good education, very balanced information, and also a good laugh here and there, which I love. And thanks again for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
For everyone listening, make sure, like I mentioned, to listen to our other episode about sleep training, what the data says and doesn't say. We debunk and talk about a lot of that stuff regarding sleep training. And if you love this episode or that episode, make sure you leave a review or a rating, or update your review or rating. It's how the podcast continues to grow. I cannot wait to have Dr. Kansagra on again in the future, and I cannot wait to chat with another guest next time on the show.